Good morning. I hope you'll pardon me. I'm a little bit nervous. My name is Charles L. Brown. I'm a Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Air Force, retired, subsequently 7 years with the Foreign Service. I like the name Charlie Brown, a gentleman by the name of Charles Schultz, of great talent, sort of elevated the name, if you will. During World War II, I was a young farm boy from West Virginia. I got the patriotic bug, joined the United States Army, ended up flying bombers in Europe, and ended the war transport in the Pacific. Finished college in the late summer of '49, recalled to active duty in the newly formed United States Air Force. I was assigned to an organization called Office of Special Investigations. The Air Force, as most of you know, was formed in 1947. OSI, as a central investigative agency for the Air Force, was formed, I think, in 1948. So everything was relatively new. Needless to say, starting in '47, UFOs were rather new. The Air Force Air Technical Intelligence Center was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and I had my office in a building adjacent to it. And our organization was the worldwide investigative agency for the Air Force for any unidentified flying objects. This lasted for about 2 years. The project name was known as Project Grudge. It was the predecessor to a project known as Blue Book, which Ed Ruppelt headed. During my experience with it, I would collect the data I didn't collect it, it was sent into my office. I analyzed it. As a pilot investigator, I was able to offer some bits of advice to the Air Technical Intelligence people. Now, you might visualize a massive office, but as I recall, we had a first lieutenant, a secretary, and a technical sergeant. That was the essence of Project Blue Book when it started, or Project Grudge, Blue Book, and expanded somewhat. During the review as an analyst of these various documentary reports, if you will, or documents, I became clearly convinced that there was substance to what was being reported, in that we had ground visual, ground radar, airborne visual, and airborne radar confirmation of some of these sightings. The individuals who made the sightings were everything from airline pilots, military pilots, police officers, some of the people that your lives depend upon on a daily basis. These are very reputable and credible people. I hope that the testimony here from very credible people will convince you of that and will further Steve Greer's disclosure project, in that pressure needs to be brought to bring this to the attention not only of the Americans but of people all over the planet. These vehicles have been seen and confirmed all over the planet. I am willing to sign a sworn statement or testify to my judgment and to what I have observed. Such things do exist. Please believe me. Please believe those who follow me. Thank you.
My name is Michael Smith. I was in the Air Force, a sergeant, from 1967 to 1973. I was aircraft control and warning operator. While I was assigned to Klamath Falls, Oregon, in early 1970, I arrived at the radar site, and they were watching a UFO on a radar that was hovering at about 80,000 feet. It sat there for about 10 minutes and then slowly descended until it dropped off the radar. It was gone for about 5-10 minutes, and then instantly reappeared at 80,000 feet, stationary. The next sweep of the radar, it was 200 miles away, stationary. It hovered there for about 10 minutes and redid the whole cycle twice more. When I found out what you normally do when you see a UFO, I was told that you notify NORAD, you don't necessarily write anything down, you don't write anything down, and you keep it to yourself. It's a need-to-know basis only. And NORAD one night called me about later in the year to let me know as a heads up that there was a UFO coming up the California coastline. I asked them what I should do about this. They said, nothing, don't write it down, it's just a heads up. And then late 1972, while stationed at the 753rd Radar Squadron in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, I received a couple panicky calls from police officers who were chasing 3 UFOs from Mackinac Bridge up I-75. So I immediately checked the radar, confirmed that they were there, called NORAD, and they were concerned because they had 2 inbound B-52s going to Kinslow Air Force Base. So they diverted them because they didn't want any proximity to the 2. And that night I answered many calls from the police department, sheriff's department and stuff. And my standard response was that there was nothing on radar. And I will testify to this under oath to a congressional hearing.
Good morning. My name is Enrique Colbeck. I am a air traffic controller. I'm sorry for my English. I'm so scared. I'm not accustomed to talk in front of a lot of people. I'm here because I'm being a witness in a voluntary way on my work. I work in Mexico City as radar controller and the International Airport of Mexico. And I'm going to give an example about this silence that we have in Mexico for several years, and this issue happens a lot of times on my country, unfortunately. For example, March 4, 1992, we detected 15 objects west side of the Toluca airport, that is very close of our international airport at 50 miles more or less. Then July 28 of 1994, we have almost a collision or something that we can name in that way with an international flight, domestic flight of Aeromexico 129, commanded by the pilot Raimundo Cervantes Ruano, that has a trash or something about in his main landing gear in the right leg. That's occurred at night at 10:30 more or less. Then in the next week, the same year, in the same moment, the Aeromexico Flight 904 has another almost collision that was reported for the pilot Corso, the Capitan Corso, at 11:30 in the morning, and we detect that object on a radar. Suddenly, just for a moment. Then the next week we have a lot of silence reported by the pilots that give us information about the weird traffic or something, brighting lights and different times, and we detect some of them in that week. But in September 15 of 1994, we have a detection about 5 hours more or less on a radar and a new equipment that we believe that that equipment was working in not a good way, because it's not human that you have detection by 5 hours of the same object and apparently without movement. Well, we concur with the technical persons of radar in our country that the radar system was working well, and was very exciting, and we surprised when the next day we received information about a periodist named Jaime Maussan that is studied these cases in Mexico, about that a sighting from a lot of people in the Metepec city. There is another point located southeast of the Toluca airport, about a sighting of the big flying saucer apparently 50 meters of diameter than for a lot of people, and that let the trashes sunk in the ground. Well, next November 24, 1994, we have on service officially our new radar system, and after that moment we have information very exactly about of these sightings at the same time with the pilots and detections. That's why I'm here, because we consider in my country that this is very dangerous. We have a lot of more cases, but I don't want to use more time in this. But it's very important that the people on the world knows these events and consider that could be very dangerous for aeronautical situation, especially in my country. I don't know why in my country that's occur frequently. But the point is that happens, and we consider dangers, and we had only, unfortunately, one trash, but we don't want to have another more. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for my English.
My name is Graham Bethune. I'm a retired Navy commander, pilot, had a top secret clearance. 50 years ago, February the 10th, 1951, I was flying from Keflavik, Iceland to Argentia, Newfoundland. It was at night. It was dark. About 300 miles outside of Argentia, I saw a glow on the water, like approaching the city at night. As we approached this glow, it turned to a monstrous circle of white lights on the water. We watched this for a while. The lights went out. There was nothing on the water. Next thing we saw was a yellow halo, small, much smaller than whatever it was launched from, and that was 15 miles away, up to our altitude. Because of the trajectory, I disengaged the autopilot, shoved the nose over to try to go under this thing. At that time, I heard a noise underneath. I thought maybe it hit us. It was actually some of the crew members ducking, and they collided, and a couple of them were injured. Then it appeared over to the right and moved out slowly and flew with us. It was still not at our altitude, but we could see the shape of it. It had a dome. We could see the coronal discharge. I went back aft to let the other pilot, Al Jones, take my seat to see what the passenger's reaction was. Came back to the cockpit, told him not to report anything, simply because what the psychiatrist had said to me, maybe they would lock us up. So basically, the instruments in the cockpit, we had 4 or 5 failures in the area of magnetic compass, the electromagnetic effect, in area of directional finders, and this type of thing. The craft was tracked by radar in excess of 1,800 miles an hour. It never did get to our altitude. We had 31 passengers, plus the psychiatrist and the crew members, that all cited this at different areas. When we landed at Argentia, Newfoundland, we were interrogated by the Air Force, an excellent interrogation, Captain Paulson. When we landed at the Naval Air Test Center here at Patuxent River, we were required by Navy intelligence to make out individual reports. Out of the National Archives, I have the 18-page official Navy and Air Force report. I've made up a report to straighten out all the truth. There's a stack of books out there this high that have written all of this up. So the truth is here. I will testify under oath before Congress that everything that I have said is true.
My name is Dan Willis. I was in the United States Navy. I held a top secret crypto level 14 extra sensitive material handling security clearance. I worked in the code room at the Naval Communications Station in San Francisco. In 1969, I received a priority message from a ship near Alaska that was classified as secret. The ship reported emerging out of the ocean near port bow, a brightly glowing a reddish-orange elliptical object, approximately 70 feet in diameter, emerged out of the water, shot into space, traveling at about 7,000 miles per hour. This was tracked on ship's radar and substantiated. Years later, I worked at the Naval Electronic Engineering Center in San Diego for 13 years. The co-worker who I worked with worked at the NORAD facility. When he first started working at the facility, he noticed objects going on the screens that track everything out in space and in the air, objects going off the scale, doing right-angle turns. When he inquired, his older supervisor advised him that, quote, it was just a visit from one of our little friends. I thought this was a little unusual. These statements are true. I'm willing to testify under oath before Congress. Thank you.
My name is Don Phillips. I was in the United States Air Force and had worked with certain intelligence agencies of the United States government. Prior to my Air Force, prior to joining the Air Force, I worked for the famous Lockheed Skunk Works. And I was working for them when I was attending college, and I worked for them in the capacity as a design engineer. It was one of my proudest moments of my life to work with a man by the name of Kelly Johnson. A lot of you might be familiar with that. It turns out that the models of aircraft that we were building, as you know, were all classified, were in the deep black, and that I came in on the end of the U-2 project. My main project was known later as the SR-71. The SR-71 had a predecessor. It had a special model built for the CIA, and that those models were one passenger, one pilot special aircraft in order to get from one place to another very, very quickly. Now these SR-71s, as we know them, the Blackbird, are the type of aircraft that are still classified in a sense as far as the altitude that it flies at and also the speed records that it holds. I'm very proud to say that this aircraft played a big part in helping to end the Cold War. The aircraft, the predecessor aircraft, there's strong evidence to suggest that perhaps these aircraft had a different role once in the air. Each pilot, and I know a few of them, each pilot had an assignment before they took off, okay? They learned about the assignment immediately prior to takeoff, and there's strong evidence to suggest that there was a dual role in that they were monitoring some type of traffic to and from planet Earth. This can be verified at a later point. I'll jump into my military experience. My first field assignment for the United States Air Force was at Las Vegas Air Force Station. And that was my first experience with Las Vegas, and I couldn't understand why people were being so excited about going to a place such as this, but I soon found out about a year later. Nellis Air Force Base is located there. Nellis is a major training center for different types of special aircraft and fighter aircraft, one of the premier training sites for pilots all around the world. However, when I learned that my assignment was at a radar site 50 miles out of town, up near Mount Charleston, I had no idea where I'd be, so finally in the daylight I was able to find the location and reported in 1965 for duty. In 1966, early in the morning, about 1 to 2 a.m., I was staying there on base, and our barracks were at about 8,000 feet. I heard a lot of commotion. You know, at that altitude, sound carries tremendously. And I thought, well, it's early in the morning, it's summertime, and it's very warm, and maybe I should get up and take a look. I didn't really want to, but I got up and took a look, walked up to the main road up near my office, which was the commander's office. I was on the commander's staff, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Evans. And I was saying, who's making all this noise? Who's making all this noise at this time of the morning? So when I got within about 50 yards of the 4 or 5 people that were standing there, one being the chief of security, they were looking up in the air, and I said, gee, their heads are all looking at the same direction. Well, I looked up to the west, northwest, and to my amazement, there were lights flashing around the sky, moving at anywhere from what seemed like 2,400 to about 3,800 miles per hour. Now, the fact that we're taking an estimate from a distance, we figured, well, this is quite something. However, we continued to watch these darting lights go across the sky and stop, absolutely stop, come to a dead stop, and reverse in an acute angle their direction, and then proceed on in they were traveling so fast that you could almost see a pattern left by, if you are computer people, when you move a mouse real quick across the screen, you see a little bit of a tail. Well, that's exactly the way these 6 or 7 craft worked. After 5 minutes of watching these things, they all seemed to group up to the northwest. Okay? They started to come in on a circle. But what I would like to point out is that where they were putting on their display in the northwest sky, just directly east of that is what is known as Area 51. Area 51 is a AEC name, okay? Atomic Energy Commission. That was the old name for Atomic Energy Commission. We knew it as the Groom Lake Flight Test Facility in the Air Force. And it was where we tested our aircraft after we got the prototype made from the Skunk Works. So here are these, let's get back to the circle in the sky. What they did was coalesce and started rotating in a circle, and then they disappeared. Well, I thought, gee, this is something that we have to keep quiet, and that was verified by the chief of security. But we waited there and talked it over for a little bit, and it seemed like, I think it was an hour. Then came the radar people from the scopes, which were at 10,000 plus feet, came down for their dinner at 2 o'clock in the morning. And the first person off the bus was a good friend of mine, Anthony Kesar. He said, he was white as a sheet, and he says, did you see that? Yeah, we all said, yeah, it was a nice display. What a show. He says, we documented them on radar. He says, we didn't give them clearance. The standing order was let them fly through the radar beam. He says, we documented 6 to 7 UFOs. Now, we don't know who was guiding those, but they were certainly intelligent, and we don't know where they landed because they coalesced and disappeared. So I will say at this point, to keep it short, that I will testify under oath as to what I say is true, and I will do so before Congress. Thank you.